evening, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon. I'd like to call the Board and Education and Business Committee meeting for Wednesday, March 30th to order. And I'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Salish people. First item of business, the adoption of the agenda. Is there any additions or amendments to the agenda? Are you moving, Mitchell? Great. Second by Trustee Duguid. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. The minutes of February 23rd meeting, 2016.
So moved.
Trustee Smallberry, Trustee Smith. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Action list. This is on page 5 of your agenda. Who is speaking to this? No name decided.
I can start if you like. The communication plan has been waiting for that strategic planning piece to get closer towards being finished before we commence on the communication piece. The two auditor reports on the auditors, one was done at the last meeting and one will be complete at the end of today.
Any questions of staff on that? Yes.
Just regarding the communication side of things, we have been meeting regarding the web side of things. Do you need anything else on that, or is there anything pending that I'm supposed to be doing? Well, I've submitted some stuff, and I don't know if it's gone anywhere yet, or if it's been any progress.
Chatted with Glenn this morning, and who was here a minute ago, and the developer by the end of this week, early next week, will have the next round of things for us to look at.
Okay.
So that's sort of the next phase, is to actually we have some product to begin to.
And it is looking really
It's
impressive.
looking good. So they're starting to put some content and so on.
Okay, thank you.
And timeline for completion?
It all depends on how much we like what they've done so far. So, right, so assuming that we're online, I think we're thinking next month.
No petitions or delegations. Review of school district board governance examination audit. Mr. Allen, are you leading this?
I am. Unless you would like to jump into the fray. As I said last month, you reviewed the Auditor General's report on Ministry and Aboriginal Education. This month you've asked to take a look at the report, or the Office of the Auditor General on school district board governance. This review was undertaken in 2013, and it looked at 3 school districts only. So they went and tried to find some sample districts based on size, urban, rural, etc. So the findings are solely based on Caribou, Colton, Surrey, and Mission. 3 quite different school districts. And through here, there was the 3 main things that they focused on were governance structure, school board governance structure, examining board's roles and responsibilities, and looking at the government's role in oversight and collaboration with school districts, more specifically school boards than just school districts. And so they looked at each of those 3 districts and with those 3 lenses. In looking at the governance structure, they really focused on some questions around the size of boards, how boards assess their own effectiveness, and how they structure themselves to meet the goals. The second objective was examining board's roles and responsibilities. The main question was, is the board taking the necessary steps to fulfill its roles and responsibilities, thereby providing effective governance for the school district? And under that, they looked at orientation of trustees, the governance structure that in the districts. They looked at, do boards have appropriate information for the they can base their decisions on. That became a bit of a theme through a couple of the districts. And fulfilling their accountability responsibilities and evaluating their own performance. Another bit of a theme there around performance evaluation that came up. And on the third objective, the main question was, does government clearly communicate performance expectations and monitor for compliance, etc. I think it's important to place this report in a bit of context before I get into the findings. This was undertaken, like I say, it was published in 2013. The bulk of the work was done in 2012. And if you think about the book we're about to have a chat with at the end of this, the conversations we've had with John Abbott, the conversations we've had in the district with David Albury, et cetera, and the general transformation conversations around organizational hierarchies and how those are shifting to sort of the new paradigm, the new way of thinking about doing business. This report does not necessarily reflect that. The Auditor General has a very traditional organizational across all organizations, not just school districts, but generally speaking. I just want to add that in. I know because I was one of the ministry people that consulted with them as they were developing this report from my past life. So some key findings, which I think are kind of important. They around the first, the board competency and assessment. They talked several times about boards creating a competency matrix, and then noted that none of the places they looked at had done that. And in fact, Surrey says, we don't even know what that is. Surrey, with their size and complexity, doesn't know what that is. So that's an interesting one. And Surrey's comment in their part was, we don't really know what one is. We're curious to understand it. But that's not something that boards have traditionally ever done, is operated under that kind of a model. They work with boards work with senior staff and make sure that the competencies are present in the district to manage the district.
So can I ask a question on that? Because I was curious, because to me it spoke to a board that is selected rather than democratically elected. So, for example, the Airport Commission Board, they target certain individuals based on a certain background or skill set to make sure that they have, because you're a working board, not a governance board. So why would the Auditor General kind of confuse the situation between the democratically elected?
That's a good question.
You're on.
Excellent question, Trustee Hutchins. Again, that's a bit of a theme through this, and they even refer to it earlier on, is that most of their experience is with, not with elected boards, but with appointed boards. That theme comes through a few times about how when you're a locally elected board, you are where you are, and you have on your team who you have on your team. Who's elected, you don't get to pick the board, which is where Surrey said, well, we rely on senior staff to augment and make sure that we have those competencies that you're referring to, but nor would I suggest that boards, the locally elected school boards, have the financial capacity necessarily to go hire a bunch of extra expertise if they find a gap somewhere. We don't have this expertise on the board. We'll go hire a consultant to provide that, which perhaps some other governance structures might.
Trustee Carr?
I just pulled up a couple from the web, and although I understand what you're saying is that we are who we are, but it looks like an interesting inventory process. So rather than perhaps goal competencies, you take a look and say what are our talents?
Yeah.
Which
I think is what Surrey was alluding to, right?
Okay.
Is they look at that more than just the board; it's the board and senior staff that they're looking to.
So an inventory rather than target. Yeah. Okay.
Under performance evaluations, they noted, the Auditor General noted that none of the boards reviewed evaluates their own performance. Again, bit of a theme. And they did note that one of the 3 districts does conduct a thorough review of its superintendent every 3 years. So again, a bit of a theme around what is the role of the board in doing some self-evaluation around their, not necessarily district evaluation, but evaluation of the board as a working unit, as a governing structure. How are we working together as a team? How are we reaching decisions, etc. Other key findings under the orientation is that each district that they reviewed provided orientation documentation to trustees when they joined the board. But the documentation, they go on to note, does not fully meet good practices. They weren't very clear about what was lacking, what should be in those materials. And boards talked about the fact that they find professional learning from other places. BCSTA provides a lot of those resources, senior staff does, etc. Board use of committees, fair conversation in there about how boards are organizing themselves under the committee structure. Interesting to note, they noted that each district also had either one or more other types of committees. Overall, it seems that boards favored operating as committees of the whole. So the structure that is here is becoming more prevalent. Certainly the three districts that they reviewed. Report then goes on to look specifically, so those are their general comments across all 3 districts, specifically to the 3 districts that they reviewed. I've sort of selected a couple that I thought really made sense. The second recommendation for Caribou-Chilcotin, we recommend the board review its governance activities continually and ensure that it's sufficiently delegating operational activities to management. That was a theme also in mission. And communicate. So again, there were sort of themes around reviewing yourself annually, reviewing superintendent regularly, and communicating how things are going. Good practices that they recognized in Caribou-Chilcotin, publicly available documentation outlining the board's roles and responsibilities. Something that this has actually ticked done next to it. The board's ability to function professionally, because the board operated in a professional manner at board meetings and so on. And in Caribou-Chilcotin's case they did. Provision of good quality information to the board. Is the board satisfied with the quality of the information they're getting when they're asked to make a decision? Do they have the right stuff at hand to make those decisions? Communication plan is certainly a theme throughout. Areas of improvement, I guess, that they found for Caribou-Chilcotin is board code of conduct and ethical standards, and this came up in each of the cases. The board said an appropriate tone at the top, but then is followed by, do you have a published code of conduct? And
can we speak to that in terms of? I don't think we have a code of conduct.
We do.
It
In a
is
policy
published.
book, yeah, but it's under review, I guess. Yeah,
Yes, we
but we
do.
do have one, yeah.
So was the code of conduct that would historically be signed by each trustee?
No.
Uh,
We used it quite heavily a few years ago.
Did
Yes,
you?
I did.
So if a person chooses, because in another world there was some frustration because when a code of conduct was published for a certain reason, actually to manage perhaps one or two interesting elected officials that chose not to participate in it anyway. So how is a code of conduct enforced? They're asking for it, they're suggesting it. but we have no power to enforce it except through some type of censure, which is really powerless. One of the
Yes.
most one of the most disappointing things that I find in here is that, and I think we should rate the Auditor General, is why aren't they giving examples? I mean, they're talking about whistleblower policy.
But what does that look like?
What does that look like? And
What
if
is
there's
it?
best practice out there, why aren't they including that?
And the fact that nobody had it. Again, it's not something that, the Auditor General comes at this with a very particular lens, and you see that lens through here, and whether that necessarily applies to locally elected school boards or not is for you to decide.
Trustee Spilger.
I'm just going to say that at the end of the report, there are recommendations to the ministry, and one is that to work with, I think, boards and others around defining models for risk management and financial stability and competency matrix and a few other things. So I think they understand that, but they didn't reference whistleblower in there. And I mean, I don't even know what that would entail in terms of writing things down, but I've never seen any guidelines around whistleblowing.
But in the education business, what does it mean?
In education, districts are typically, people say what they want to say. They're not really handcuffed. So I don't really know what it means in education. And it's certainly not something the ministry at this point has picked up yet either.
Trustee Croft.
Unless I missed something. Yeah, as usual. There's, I don't see anything in here about engaging with the community or any standards in that direction or any examination of that. And I think that as a publicly elected board, it's really important for us to be visible and engaged and accessible beyond posting documents that nobody ever reads on the website.
But my understanding, the scope of their investigation or their evaluation was this big.
Yeah.
They didn't do the deputy, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
They did talk about hiring practices,
Yeah.
a lot of things.
as an elected board, it feels really, really important, and it feels like a gap in the document, just of note.
So, is there any recommendations from staff in terms of the outcome of this that we are missing in one area that is pressing, or if they chose to investigate our governance practices that we are lacking in? So I understand we have a complete code of conduct that's going to be looked at. We don't even know what a whistleblower policy is, and they didn't provide any examples. A conflict of interest policy, I believe that's actually incorporated in already into our bylaws. Is this something that we need to consider acting on at this time?
To me, there was a few things, not necessarily to act on, but as I sort of looked at three big themes that came out of this. Clear roles between board and staff. I think we're well down that road of trying to clarify those and some policy on that, and I think that's something that's still evolving, but I think that's not done, or not complete, but I think we're way in good shape heading down there. Is the right information getting to trustees at the right time to make decisions on? Is a question we should be always asking ourselves. Are you getting the right stuff? Is the briefing note process working? Are they in the right format? Or is there, now they do couple that with responses about two of the districts about trustees more clearly delegating work to staff, like don't play with trains. So those are, so is that balance right? And to me, that's a balance piece, and that's something we always need to be checking. And I think that falls into the third one, which is the board self-evaluation, which I don't think we do. Most boards don't. In fact, the three here don't. And that's coupled with evaluation of the superintendent. So that sort of district staff and the board together? Are we doing the things that we're supposed to be doing? Is the board structure working? Do we have are you making the right decisions based on the right information, et cetera? So I think for us, the big one to look at, I think we're in good shape on 2 of the 3. And the third one, like I say, is thinking about self-evaluation of the board, by the board, and superintendent evaluation.
Trustee Smith? Trustee McCollum?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, you know, if we talk about what we did right, what we did wrong, and how can we change it next time, because that's what happens in every other avenue and every other board that I sit on. But this board never does that. And it kind of drives me crazy, because sometimes we make the same mistake more than once. You know, we make it over and over because we haven't stopped to sit down to evaluate what we did and correct it. So I think that it's brilliant that the board have an evaluation every year. Or evaluate itself, sorry, to see where we went right, where we went wrong. And do we feel that we're getting information, and do we all know the same thing? And I mean, like, just overall, I think it's a great conversation to have.
Trustee Croft? Sorry.
In agreement, and I think now that we have a strat plan close to completion, that makes that kind of evaluation a lot more plausible, frankly, and possible to do.
Trustee DeBoot?
It is part of our plan. It was one of the items that's on our strategic plan, so it is moving towards.
Trustee Spilberg?
Well, I was just going to say that I don't know if it's as a result of this AG report or was already in play, but I've noticed that a lot of school districts have started self-evaluation processes. And one of the models that I keep hearing about is the BCSDA process that's led by Gayla Erickson. And I have heard from other districts that they are really pleased with it. I know there's 100 question survey that you start with, so I have looked at it, and I think it's pretty comprehensive. I would assume too we can add other questions if we wish to pursue them, but it is very comprehensive, and I think well worth our time to use that as we move forward.
So when you said it's led by somebody, Gayla, what does that mean?
As a facilitator, so.
Also, it was
Yeah.
self-evaluation, and then she...
Yeah, then she leads us through the discussion of it.
And the districts that are using it, do you know if they are using it on the calendar year or in the school year? Like, is it in June we start using it, or moving forward, or?
I have no insight to that. I would think, though, an annual evaluation is pretty intensive, looking at the questionnaire. But I would assume, I mean, I think we're in prime time because we're kind of halfway through our term. Maybe it's for the rest of the year to make any, the next 2 years to make any changes within our operation.
Trustee Thorne?
I know in the beginning we had talked about looking at some of the stuff that was in existence and keep what was good and then add on. But to come into the 21st century is not an easy step, especially for the school board with so many directions. But I think it's something we had indicated we wanted to do. Having an annual assessment, it sounds great, but 12 months goes by so fast. And I got strawberries to worry about there.
So can we ask from the PCSTA a synopsis of that evaluation tool?
We can?
Or is it online? Just like,
No. I asked Gail for a copy because I thought it was something that we might need to move into at some point. And I have it, it's just stored. So she asked me not to share it at that point. I think possibly she likes to introduce it and go over it. I'm not exactly clear why I was asked to keep it confidential.
Anybody have any negative thoughts about actually just pursuing that and perhaps seeing if we can get something from you? Welcome, Trustee Dolan.
Not a negative thought, as you phrased it, but I think there are a variety of models out there, and I think to Trustee Spilsbury's point, there's, the full meal deal, like I think the BCSTA one is that you might do once a term. And perhaps there's some other annual pieces that plug into that, and we might want to look at a variety of options that, because as you said, that more and more boards are taking on self-evaluation processes. See what's in play out there in a variety of districts. BCSTA has sort of a proprietary version that they're, at the moment, keeping fairly close to themselves. I think there's a number of tools out there.
So with that, would somebody be willing to make a motion that we ask staff to explore with other districts their evaluation tools? You're moving it? Second by Trustee Smith. Any discussion on that motion, asking for staff to explore options for evaluation? Yes.
Maybe amendment also for assessment of superintendents, because I think probably go hand in hand, so if we could get both.
Great. So we're recommending to the board. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. So one other question I have is on our page 25, it speaks to, we recommend the board create a, we recommend that the board review its governance activities continually. It's not an annual thing, continually, and ensure that it's sufficiently delegating operational activities. Is that just a process or mindset that when we deal with business, we actually ask the question, is this governance or operational? Is that? We recommend the board review its governance activities continually.
And I think you see that in two places. As recommendations to mission and care of the
Yes. So how does that, how do we actualize that? How does that become a way of doing business?
To me, it's adhering to or following the policy that separates the role of superintendent and staff and role of board. It's living that. It's fine to have a policy, but if you're not doing it, then that's a problem. So to me, that's what that says. And knowing those two districts, I would venture to suggest that's probably fairly correct on that.
Trustee Thorne.
I agree. Some of the things that we've come across in personal issues with, like what happened in Lake Cowichan and another thing, those are the kinds of things that we need to keep in mind so that we can start reviewing, like every 2 years, all of our policies to see what's working, what's not working. I'm basing what I'm understanding on just things that we deal with day to day. And we've had a couple issues where we thought, well, we need to go back and review this and update. I think we need to have a specific time we say, okay, let's put everything on one plate and let's go through it and see what we need and how we can make things better. That's my interpretation.
Okay, any more comments or outcomes from this discussion? Okay, moving on to business and operations. Mr. Sanders.
Thank you. I'm going to hand out some sheets that are on a slide that's going to be really difficult to read.
But these have numbers on it.
Yeah, I started.
I should be fine. I'll let you go. Karen's coming. Karen will.
There we are.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the big print too. Jason, you're
So, Gina's going to bring up the PowerPoint and start there. Oh yeah, sorry, just wait a moment because I'm trying to follow some slides. If not, I can run and grab mine. Grab the technology if that's fine. Bring it back. Well, we all know we can run faster than that.
Everybody can run my water, right?
Well, I really don't.
Nobody
Nobody
too.
Over mountains.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're in the
Not a
process of
problem.
flushing.
Yeah.
Big signs everywhere.
So right just below you is the,
We're number 2.
yeah, number 2. I have a dongle, so fine. This,
Spreadsheets.
thank you.
So this is your first budget?
Wow. Well, the first, well,
You were-
16th budget.
First one he's gonna sign.
That's right.
So you get a new pair of shoes for this? Pair of shoes?
Shiny socks.
Maybe
Yeah,
a
yeah,
second-hand pair of shoes might be more.
So we've been preparing for the budget for the last couple of months, and been bringing information as we have it, and been waiting for the funding announcement, which arrived on March 15th, as expected and on time. In February, we brought forward an estimate of, called it a budget preview as to where we thought we would be, and I'll now walk through where we actually have landed. So in the provincial context, this is an important slide just to sort of start the conversation. If you look at the green line, that's the percentage of school-aged children in the province that currently are part of the population. If you look at the blue line, that's the percentage of population that are 65 plus. So you see those numbers starting to get further and further apart. And if you look pre-2011, school-aged children exceeded the number of people over 65. And the purpose of this slide is just really to show you that in the provincial budget, there's competition for funding now. As the population is aging, the budget required for health services is increasing. In our district, we've been living through a period of decline of between 200 and 300 students most years. Some of the years are more rapid than others, but as you get down to about 2013, 2014, you see that number start to stabilize, so that drop of students has leveled out, or is predicted to level out. It still says estimated in 15-16, even though that's the year we're in, as we haven't received our May count yet. So that population number may still be different. But the important part here is that we had projected that our enrollment would grow by about 25 students next year. So that is a pretty stable population. We'll wait and see what happens in September, but that's our projection. And that's the projection used for this funding estimate. So I know this slide would be impossible to view, which is why we produced it on the larger paper. And I'm just going to move to the next part here to talk a little bit about this. So I'll go back to the slide. So some of the highlights of the actual funding announcement, and I've put an A, B, C, D, and E here just to help guide us along, is under A. The per pupil rate has risen from $71.58 to $71.66. Under B, the province made amendments to special ed designated student numbers that were submitted by school districts, as historically districts have submitted fewer students than they actually received. So the province basically added some numbers to everybody's enrollment. Now, they only added one student to our district, and our numbers are usually pretty close as far as the number that we claim, or we say we're going to have, and the number that we actually have, but some districts have been historically underclaiming or underestimating, so the province went ahead and made a few adjustments there.
So same question, can we just go back to A? $8 increase. Like, how would that even be calculated?
I'll show you.
Is it, you're going to show us later?
It's
is it?
coming.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, he's thorough. Yes, I'll show you where that came from. Under C, that's a line for funding protection, and it's a 0. So that's new for us, and I'll get to that in a later slide as well. D, we weren't sure if there would be continued funding for the education plan, so that is the funding required to roll out the new curriculum, or some funding that they've given us to roll out the new curriculum. So that was good news. And under E, this is the second year of the administrative savings. So you see that number is a negative. It's negative 348,000. So that's our share of the 25 million that's expected to be found province-wide for administrative savings. And I'll explain where last year's share went, which was just over 400,000 in the next slides. So the ministry has a budget this year of $4.864 billion. Last year they had a budget of $4.827 billion. So that's an increase of $37 million provincially. That's come into the system to fund education for 16-17. What they did is they funded the labor settlements with $62 million. So when the provincially negotiated agreements occurred a couple of years ago, there was a commitment to funding those. They then took away $25 million for administrative savings. So that's how we get that net figure of $37 million going into the education block. So that was expected that we would have admin savings. We knew about that last year, and we knew about it this year. So we're in the second year of that. I explained that they made an adjustment to special education enrollment from what we had submitted. So that was one level 2 student, and they've adjusted our revenue up by $18,850. And the other highlight, which Trustee Hutchinson just brought up, is about the $8 per student, where the rate has gone from $71.58 to $71.66. I'll move to my next slide.
Sure.
So, thank you for sending this earlier, thank you for answering my question, but I'm still trying to get my head around. So they can deduct the 25 million for administrative savings, but we still have to find our own administrative savings.
We do. So they took it from us from revenue, and we need to prove to them that we made equivalent reductions. It's not a double up.
Okay. Just checking. Thank you, but thank you for answering my email.
Okay, so we had administrative savings last year, which we have to maintain this year, plus the additions.
Correct.
Okay, so it is doubled up.
We have 2 years of administrative savings to find, to maintain this year. So the $8 per student increase. We know that we estimate that the provincially negotiated labor settlements for teachers and support staff will cost the district approximately $946,000 for 16-17. And a reconciliation of the funding actually received shows us that it was not sufficient to cover those cost pressures. So when we look at, I tried to lay it out here, it's numbers in and numbers out, but I'll walk through this. Item A is what we think the estimated cost pressures are going to cost this district, $946,000. What did we actually receive? B, $8 per FTE times 7413.875 is about $59,000. So that $8 per student that we received is going to provide us with about $59,000.
So in percentage terms, the total budget, is that less than 1/100% or 1/10%? What is that? $60,000 on.
It's about 1/100, it's less than 1/100%.
Don't spend it all at once.
I know, who increases the budget by that amount?
BC.
The answer is self-evident.
Last year's administrative savings could show up as a line item added to the 348 that I'm showing you here on E, but what they decided to do was to take it out of the per pupil rate. So I've added it back in for the purposes of showing you what they actually funded us for labor settlement. So labor settlement, the actual funding increase is $474,000 that they actually put into the block for labor settlement that our district would have received for labor settlement had we not had to pay back last year's admin savings. Okay? So that creates a cost pressure of about $471,000. So we'd already banked on paying last year's savings. I have a question.
Sorry, I'm studying these numbers. Trustee Smith.
Okay, so let me get my head around this. Last year's savings drive me crazy. So you've added back in the savings to go with the 59, right? Those two numbers are going together. So technically, they're supposed to fund us $946,000. You're taking away the administrative savings. So where's the balance?
I'll show you.
All right, sorry.
So, I'm calculating our share of that 62 million just on the basis of this district is 1.41% of the province, that we should have received 871,000. So if the ministry said we're giving districts 62 million and we were to receive all that $62 million, we should have received 871,000. It's pretty close to what we're estimating those cost pressures to be. So it's a good check that we've got our costs correct on our budget side. So the shortfall from the funding that was actually received, including the deduction of the 15, 16 admin savings, which is showing up in a different place, it's in the per pupil rate now, shows us that they actually funded 54% of the wage increase. So where did that money go? Okay. So communication from the ministry and the operating grant does not specifically address the fact that they shorted us on funding the provincially negotiated labor settlement. It's actually comes across very differently that good news, there's 62 million in the block and you should have funding for that. However, it does not address the unexpected enrollment growth that happened this year and the enrollment growth for next year. So in that 37 million, right, which I reconciled for you earlier, 62 in, 25 out for admin savings, there's no other add-on for new kids. Correct?
Yes.
So this year, the province, we had approximately 6,500 students arrive in 15-16 that weren't expected. And we received additional funding. Remember, we received an announcement that there was additional funding going in to pay for those students. That wasn't sustained into 16-17. So what I've been able to sort of figure out from this is that we had an enrollment growth between September last year and September this year of 7,500 students provincially, but no additional funding put into the block for those 7,500 students. If you calculate that 7,500 students times 7,166, the A figure here, there should be about $54 million required to fund those new students. But they're going to get some money back, because they're going to get some money back from funding protection. Funding protection last year was 47 million, and this year it's 20 million. So that's 27 million that goes back into the formula that helps to pay for those new students, but doesn't pay for all of the new students. Still leaves us $27 million short provincially to pay for the 7,500 students that have been growing.
Doesn't that go against the legislation that you don't actually fund the number of students that you know you have?
Okay.
Spoiler alert,
Yeah.
it's coming.
So correspondence, sorry.
All this is, I keep having one thing pop into my head over and over and over as you go through this, and I appreciate your work. I don't understand it, but I appreciate it. Every year when my kids go to school, we get a form. And at the very top of that form, in little dinky letters that you don't pay attention to, it asks for a yes or a no regarding kids going to school and getting funded. Do you want them? I forgot the question because I rarely check it. And I'm just wondering if that has any influence on some of the dollars that you're playing with.
I think, are you talking about the students that are identified for receiving a program in Aboriginal Studies,
Yeah.
Aboriginal Enhanced Studies? So that is a number that is just below the B figure here, where we have 1,431 students. So it does factor into our funding. So each student that ticks the yes box contributes $1,195 to the district.
I know that's one meeting that I hope our chairs, when they have meet with tribes, that it's clearly defined that we need that yes, because a lot of them will just not pay attention to it. And it means we gotta, well, you gotta.
So on the enrollment growth piece, everybody's figured it out now, provincially, as far as BC School Trustees Association, BC Association of School Business Officials, BC Superintendents Association, and there's been correspondence and communication with the ministry on behalf of boards and in regards to this issue. And the ministry did reply that they are working with those organizations to ensure that there's a commitment to fund enrollment increases, as it was promised by the province, that if for new students there would be funding for new students. But it does not appear to be reflected in this grant. The figure provincially that is being used is $30 million that would be required to fund that enrollment growth, because of course the holdback gave some money back as well. So that $27 million that I kind of quickly reconciled seems to be consistent with what the province sees as shortfall. If we were to receive $30 million provincially, so that would be the province deciding to support the Ministry of Education, not the Ministry of Education making a decision for money they don't have, but the province deciding to support the Ministry of Education. Our share at 1.41%, which is our size compared to the district population, would be 423,000. So that's not that far off that shortfall figure of about 400,000 that I've shown you on a previous slide. So it really becomes clear that we got money for the labor settlement, but we didn't all receive it all because it went to funding the growth across the province. So for the purposes of this first phase.
So why did it take all those other organizations to make the province and the Ministry of Education aware that they have provided insufficient funds? Like, surely goodness, the Treasury Board must have been aware of this. The Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Finance, I mean, whoever is doling out the funds.
It's
Glad it's you, not me. I have an answer, but I don't know.
This is on film. It is not a surprise to anybody at this time, when the budget was being set in March, that 6,500 students had arrived last September. So your question is a good one. When last September we knew we had 65 more students provincially, why weren't they accounted for in the funding that Treasury provided to the Ministry of Education when the commitment was made at that time to fund the new enrollment growth? I can't answer that, but it should not have been a surprise to the province that student numbers are on the way back up again. We've just shown in our graph that it's gone down and gone up. That's consistent across the province. So it shouldn't be a surprise that there's more students in 16-17. And it shouldn't be a surprise in March when you're setting your budget of the student numbers that you had the previous September. But I can't answer why when it wasn't.
You could also say it wasn't a surprise.
Yes, it's not a surprise.
Trustee Croft.
If I could paraphrase, so for an unknown reason, the Treasury Board did not fund 6,500 students.
7,500.
For an unknown reason, the Treasury Board did not show up at the door with the money for the, did not fund the 7,500 students.
Okay.
So that there's no connection, official connection to those two dots at the moment.
Correct.
Thank you.
None that I'm aware of, or I can make.
I'm sorry?
None that I'm aware of.
Fair enough.
So for the purposes of this phase of the budget, we have not included any adjustments to the grant, as we do not know if there will be any adjustments to the grant, but we do know that the province is aware that there's not funding for new students, and groups are working on it.
I have a question before. So let's say they actually do fund that $30 million. Does that actually increase the net $8?
Yes.
It does. Thank you. Trustee Smith.
So now with what you just said, it's got me a little riled up. So you're telling me that 7,500 students receive zero funding. How is that even legal?
They're funded. No additional funding was added to the block to pay for them.
So where did the money come from? The holdback?
Came from the wage increases.
So, Okay.
Trustee Crawford.
Next week I have an opportunity to meet with Mike Bernier, and I don't know how many other people will be there. Is it fair to assume that he's aware of this $7,500? I think it is.
Trustee Thorne.
Is it possible for us to have, I don't know, I know on council we would have time with ministers, but is it possible for us to sit down with our education minister in Vancouver when we get there so we can clarify a lot of these questions, because it's a biggie.
I can answer that. I think there was correspondence from the president of our association, and this message was sent very loud and clear, and his response in writing we saw was, they're going to find the money to fix this. They haven't found it yet, and that's why
And
our
that's why I
secretary
asked the
was
question.
being prudent. And
Because I'd like to look at it right in the eye and have him answer face straight out. Then go Indian on him.
Trustee DeGroot.
The Minister of Education can say that, yes, you should be getting this money. Unfortunately, unless they get the money from finance, it's not happening. So it's not the Minister of Education we need to go yell at. It would be whoever is making those decisions in finance. Mr. Dion?
Yes.
Trustee Eastwood.
Is it Mike?
Can I just say that it's the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Education that have both been in this circuit with BCSTA and other organizations. So they both are, I guess, being connected to the parties that need to be there. I don't know that us meeting with either of those ministers at this point would be as effective as perhaps sharing with the BCSTA the extent of our funding shortfall and what the implications are, so that they have that information to take forward to their meetings.
Trustee Eastwood.
And also the emails we've been receiving from BCSTA talking about getting inputs from boards so that they have our financial picture district-wide, like they've already done that work. So all of what we're asking, everybody else is asking the same questions. And Teresa's been really good as far as, you know, keeping us updated on what work they're doing to try and, yeah.
Trustee Thorne.
Yeah, and I know Teresa does well, but when I think of this community and I think of people like Michelle Staples on Duncan City Council, all these guys are going to be going to the UBCM very shortly if they haven't done it already. And that's why I think we need to start really looking at the strength that's here in our community and have that agency board that I've been dreaming about, where we could have more clout at the tables by having members of city council go and talk with some of the ministers, then still have the Teachers Association, everybody else all on the same page. To me, that would be awesome. It just seems like we're all rowing parallel, but we're not communicating, and it is a big missing ingredient. That's just my thought of the day.
Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Sankos.
So the next slide that I think is relevant as part of this operating grant is that we are no longer in funding protection. So after 7 years of being in funding protection, we are now out. And that means that for each student that we go up, we will go up by $7,166. And for each student that we go down, we will go down by $7,166. So this is new, not new, but new again, that we will fluctuate with our actual enrollment. Now we are $579,000 out of funding protection, so we're not on the line. So it's not like we lose a couple students and we go back in. We are quite a bit out now based on this our enrollment estimates. So it would take a pretty significant drop in our numbers, you know, in the neighborhood, I guess, of about 80 from what we projected to go back into funding protection. So looking, we just talked about the provincial grant, and that represents about 89% of our budget, the big slice of the pie. As far as our funding goes, we have tuition, which is our international student program, and other revenues, which includes transportation fees and our local education agreements. So there isn't a lot of room for districts to generate revenue outside of the provincial grant, and I'm tying this back to the very first slide where there's a lot of pressure on provincial funding for individuals 65 plus. So when you rely so heavily on the province, if you don't receive funding for them, it has a big impact, is the point of this slide. How do we spend our money? We have 4 main functions. We have instruction, which is the big green one, which is all of your classroom services directly to kids. Then we have district administration, which includes the board and the board office complex. Operations and maintenance, which is custodial and grounds and maintenance, and actually technology services fall under operations and maintenance. That's for the accounting manual. And then we have our transportation services, which are, the mechanics are there, as well as the busing and the cost of running that system. Very small amount left in the budget here as per this year, which is $50,000 pay down of our unfunded employee future benefits as we work towards eliminating that debt. As we get into options, that is optional, and could decide not to put that in the budget and to pay that should we have funds at the end of the year rather than budget for it. But we'll get to that as we get into the options.
Trustee DeGroot?
How much money is left in that?
200 and, I think after this year, 217,000.
Oh,
Down from 4 million.
Yeah.
How do we spend instruction? So this is how that green piece of the pie gets divvied up. And again, this is just really a slide for background as we move towards what the shortfall is where we put our money. Probably more importantly is how when we look at it by expenditure type, we show you that 90% of our budget, our current budget, and these are figures are before we make any adjustments. So, of course, this is all expenses loaded, and we were about 89% of our budget was wages and salaries in the year that we're in. It's higher now as our starting point. We're not balanced yet. And we've had wage increases, so that's driven those cost pressures up to be a higher percentage of the overall budget for our starting point. But that 90-10 ratio is something we always think about as far as 90% staff and 10% other. That other is about $7.5 million. So the big piece of our budget is really in the wages and benefits. So the slide, the big question, the number we've been waiting for.
I go with that. In terms of supplies, is that just classroom supplies, or is that supplies for janitorial work?
Yeah, it includes, let's go back to the slide here. It would include custodial maintenance supplies, technology purchases, learning resources, classroom supplies. There's a broad definition of supplies that roll up into that account. So the big question, this is the one we've been waiting for and have done our projections earlier in February, and we were off the wrong way. It's showing a shortfall right now of just under 3.7 million. We thought it would be about 3.4, but if you factor in the underfunding on what we thought would be funded, the wage negotiated wage settlements, we were actually not that far off as far as where we. And should that 30 million come back into the system, should it come in, we're closer to 3.2, which again is just pretty close to that 3.4 figure that we were thinking about in February. So I'm pleased that I would have liked to have had better news and been able to say, it's way less than what we thought, but it's not. So how we reconcile that quickly is revenues down, grants down, we're out of funding protection. Other revenues, slight increase that we're calculating in for some minor growth in the international student program. And we brought in surplus to balance the 15-16 budget. So we haven't brought in any surplus into these figures for next year yet, and we'll get to that as we move into options on balancing the 16-17.
Trustee Smith?
When we talked about increasing revenue, and we were talking about the international program last year, we were talking about the teachers that go to China or wherever and teach English. And you have projected that the number of them that would be traveling or the programs would be happening would increase. Do we see that? Is that expected to grow this summer so that, because I know that those were some pretty heavy dollars for us.
Yeah, there were 3 programs expected for 15-16, for the summer of 15-16, and one of them happened. So there are, the district principal of International is actually out now, but has recently been working on 2 more programs, so we may be back to that 3 again, and we just need to touch base with her on how successful she's been able to negotiate with those. I think one is in Spain, one is in Singapore, and then we have the one in Beijing, which is continuing to operate.
Okay.
Numbers were down a bit this past summer. It'll be in its 3rd year for 16-17, but it's expected to go back up again. We factored that in. So on the expenditure side, wage increments, teachers move through grid steps as they progress through their careers, and that costs money every year. There could be retirements that offset some of that, and we'll be looking at those average teacher salaries as we look at ways to solve the budget crunch at the bottom here. There's the district's support staff, it's teacher and support staff wage increases that we talked about earlier, that $946,000 that we've built in. When we add 25 students to our enrollment estimate, we need to add teaching staff. So I've put a teacher in just to kind of keep the SER consistent for a starting point, SER being the student educator ratio. Support staff. So this year, we had a short year. We started late in September and we're ending early. Well, that goes back to a regular school year next year, and we'll have staff over that year. So it was a blip to take that 250 out this year, kind of a one-time savings. And we didn't have to go back in for the 16-17. We had a really nice reduction on the employer's portion of the teacher pension plan. Right, so that's reflected there. And these aren't new numbers from what we had in February. We're just laying them out again as we get to our reconciled position. Some minor staff benefit rate changes, and those aren't final yet. We receive our benefit rates usually somewhere around April, but we'll ask for some preliminary estimates from our carriers soon. But from what we know with our WorkSafe rates and others, that there's some slight pressures there. Next generation networks, that's the high-speed internet that's being brought into the community and into all of our schools. The levy for that is now up. We thought this year was $244,000, so next year's closer to $340,000 that we now pay for that. So that's a new charge just in the last 2 years that we now have to fund as a school district. And there were a whole bunch of other ups and downs that I didn't list that add up to a savings of $102,000. So that's how we get to the 3.6, 3.7.
Can you just explain the pension rate reduction? Why would that? Is that a percentage rate per teacher down, or is that?
It's a percentage of salary, and it is the percentage is down significantly.
Why?
I believe it just has to do with the actuarial's evaluation on the money that's set aside in the plan. So the employee still pays the same amount, but the employer's contribution is dropping. But that is about. I think that's about a $5 million a year tab, so 652 is pretty significant. So why is the shortfall so large for 16-17? We haven't had a shortfall of this magnitude for a couple of years, so I thought best to put a slide up that talks about why it happened. Key reasons are we're out of funding protection, which is automatically going to drop us by 1.5%, just because when you are in funding protection, you drop by 1.5%. And we are now, so this year we had funding protection of about 1.1 million that we're in. Last year it was 3 million. Now we're out. So that 1 million has to be found. Mm-hmm. There was underfunding of the provincially negotiated labor settlements. So explain that, talked about that I guess enough. There is surplus that has been utilized in 15-16 to balance this year's budget. Now we were lucky to have that, and we had that because we had job action, which is really, there were a few weird things that happened in that previous year that led to us accumulating surplus funds. Had we not had that surplus, when we received those 150 students in September that we had to put in 10 teachers for, we would have been making reductions to the budget this year. Those reductions would have carried forward, and we would have a smaller problem this year because we would have already had made those adjustments. So really what we were able to do is defer from this year to next year reductions that should have been made this year, having not had surplus, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And then we have expenditure increases. We talked about the wages and the supplies, and there's inflation, and there's Next Generation Network, et cetera. So there's always cost pressures on the expenditure side. So this is the final slide. At this time, the staff are starting to develop some options for balancing the budget, but we're also asking to hear from the community and partner groups, and that will begin tomorrow. So tomorrow will be the public meeting, and following that, there are a number of liaison meetings that have been set up for next week, where we'll hear from partner groups. And then we have a series of meetings where we bring information back to BEBC, and we go to advisory, and we hope to wrap it all up by May the 3rd with the final reading of the budget. And the reason May the 3rd is our target date, even though the budget isn't due to be filed until the end of June, is to ensure that any staffing changes that need to occur, there'll be ample time to implement those. So this isn't the biggest budget challenge that we have faced as a district. It can be balanced, but it will certainly not mean the status quo to balance it. And that concludes my presentation.
So will you be doing this presentation tomorrow night then?
Yes.
And then are people signing up to speak in advance of that, or are they just, I gather you'll be chairing the meeting, is it? So people will just, seating festival, standing up?
So far, I haven't heard from anybody that has requested any information in advance of the meeting. I think this is really the first opportunity to hear this information publicly, unless anybody has got a hold of or has taken the chance to look at the agenda that we produced for this evening.
Any other questions, Mr. Sankos? So how was your first budget?
Fine.
Thank you. Well done, thank you.
Well, it looks like you get those new socks after all.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the BCSTA survey for MOU implementation. And BCSTA are asking for our input into how's it going. So it's been I guess a year since they signed it. Looking for advice in terms of how we want to proceed. Do you want to discuss these collectively, or do you want to send in your ideas to Gina or Trustee Spilsbury? Sorry, yes.
Can I just think that probably through Gina, I will be sending it back in on behalf of the board. I don't know if you have any comments that you want to make quickly now, and then email anything else in.
What's the time? Sorry, what's the deadline?
April the 18th, I think.
I think it is the 18th, that's right around the BCSTA meeting.
Maybe it's a week prior to me, I'm not sure. It was due like this week, and then they extended it, yes, but I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure.
So, any comments about, has this been a useful tool? Have the candidates under the MOU being lived up to? And I think we have to set aside our feelings regarding the budget
allocation when we evaluate this, but Trustee Croft.
I'm going to do what you just told me not to. But it seems that that financial considerations are the elephant in the room. And I don't think we have to speak to shortfalls, but speak to co-constructing assessments of financial need within the system, and fair finances. And I don't mean to say you guys are not giving us enough money. I just think we need to be part of the conversation, and we'd like to contribute to sorting out how much money is going to be spent on our kids.
Trustee Smith?
I remember when this was signed, and about 3/4 of the room all said, well, this is a mom and apple pie comfort document, and is it really going to be? And I don't know that my feelings have changed a whole lot on the document, so have fun with filling out that survey. But I mean, my input, should I have written it, wouldn't overly be positive. Because it's a mom and apple pie document, and I don't think that it has a lot of meat to it that it could have had. And so when we originally discussed this, I guess it's going back several years now, a lot of us had said, there's not a lot of meat to this document to really get our teeth into to direct, the BCSTA board. So, I don't know.
So you're saying, how do you evaluate mom and apple pie? Trustee DeGroot?
Well, just continuing on in that, I know that we sat at the table and it was like, okay, that's really nice, but there isn't any, this is what happens if, or this is how we plan on doing this. All it kind of said was, we're gonna all work together and make nice. And making nice is one thing, but it didn't give, and I remember sitting with the person who used to sit in your chair, and he actually said, there's nothing in this. It was just a nice, make you feel good document.
Trustee Croft?
I wonder if, everyone, if you consider including something in the way what the self-evaluation on the MOU is. I mean, we got a recommendation that boards need to self-evaluate. How do the partners in this document self-evaluate the successes of the MOU and report on that back to the trustees? And that, because if nothing's happening, then why is everybody investing in it? And if something good is happening, well, let's follow up on that.
Well, that's a good point. Is the ministry actually evaluating itself as well? Yes.
The partners are, evaluating the effectiveness of their participation.
But I'm wondering if we can go back to your suggestion, is that there is no, in the MOE, no mention of finances. And why is finances taken out of the picture?
They ask us for transparency on the trustee side. Why can't we say we'd like more transparency on the treasury board side?
I've just been looking at this, and I think one of the important distinctions is it's a co-governance relationship between BCSDA and the Ministry of Education. So it is not, there is no co-governance model at the ministerial or government level. It is simply a working document for the Ministry of Education staff to work with the BCSDA staff and boards. So we can talk about finances, and that's fine. I'll write it in, but I'm not sure how much effectiveness it will have. Certainly open to putting it in. The other is this document is the self-evaluation by the BCSDA and the Ministry of Education, and they were signed off. So they're asking us to give input on, have they got it right? Have their initiatives been effective? Not is the MOU good? It is, have what they have done satisfied the intent of the MOU?
No.
Can you just tell them what
Okay.
I'm doing before?
No.
So you're suggesting on page 68, when it says what additional items does your board recommend the BCST and the ministry will focus on in the MOU? And that's not adding something to the MOU, that's what they should focus on, that's something written already. Trustee Smith.
So when I look at going forward priorities for 2016, which is the page that I think cracked me up the most, the ministry and BCST already work in collaboration with Finesse to do stuff there. And I know we're talking about the Auditor General's report, but they're already saying that they're already moving forward. I mean, so this is work that's already being done. I mean, other than acknowledging proclamation of Public Education Day, but continued collaboration around communication of joint announcements. Well, no, they tell us when we announce.
Yeah.
And we've had that happen before to us. You know, you will not announce until we've announced. Like, that's not collaboration, this is how it's gonna be done. So, you know, I don't know. I just, like I said, when I read this document, to me held no meat. Like, it's,
Would you like to write some meat that I could?
Sure. That's a dangerous question.
Trustee Croft?
I was just wondering, Rod, having your ministry experience, do you have any thoughts on this MOU?
he's afraid.
I think what Trustee Spilsbury said is absolutely true. This is between ministry and it's not between government and BCSTA, it's between ministry and BCSTA. And it's odd in that it's signed, pieces of this signed by a non-elected person and an elected person, which kind of crosses an interesting gulf, quite intentional, I would suggest. And it is very much, if I was going to say something provocative, which I would never do, to me it's less co-governance and it's really a cooperation agreement as opposed to a co-governance agreement. Governance is balanced. This is a cooperation agreement. We will tell you when we're going to do things. And we like it if you tell us if you're going to hate it or not. As opposed to a co-governance. It's something else.
Trustee Croft?
It has always felt like a document that keeps us all busy while nothing changes. Sorry, I said that out loud. And
No,
I
you're not.
just feel like, thank you. Not true. And it just feels like we're kind of chasing our tails and, you know, we should say, you know, if you guys want to do this and it's not substantive, we no longer support it. I mean, prove to us that it's a substantive document that we should spend some time on. That to me is my question.
However, it is not unusual from my experience that first MOU, and I understand this is the first MOU, or an accord, usually is quite motherhood and apple pie, and it takes time for that to evolve to a more concrete position. And as people realize, well, what is this motherhood and apple pie, and they say, well, how do we make it more definitive? So it could hopefully, with the right people at the table, in 3 years' time or in 5 years' time, when a new MOU is signed, is how do you put some meat behind the statements?
So maybe there's someone to voice that in my room.
So I don't see any other hands up. So Trustee Spilsbury, you will be receiving any comments from us individual trustees, compiling them and writing as you do so well, a submission.
Yes. Thank you. I would be delighted to hear more from you. I do want to say one thing, though, that I don't think anyone else here other than Superintendent, Secretary, Treasurer were able to be part of. And that was the, what they're calling the annual general meeting of the ministry staff and chairs of the boards. And I found that really helpful. Like, it was the first time that I had any of that kind of real inside information into what was happening from various departments. And yes, we get it from our senior staff, but it's not as comprehensive as we receive, because we simply don't have the time for them to take, you know, one topic and spend, you know, an hour or 2 hours on it. So I thought that was really helpful, and maybe that should extend for all trustees, or maybe a regional way, so that it isn't so expensive for us to go.
Like a webinar format
Yes,
or something?
or a
Yeah.
webinar, yeah. And if you're okay, I'll put that into the report.
Ms. Chow?
It's interesting when we have just looked at the Auditor General's report, and one of the third question for them was about the ministry's role in helping boards govern. And part of that was, it's in, you know, and I'm paraphrasing greatly, but the Auditor General said, it's interesting that the ministry corresponds and talks more to staff than they do to trustees. Which is sort of traditionally how it's been, right? Superintendents go, they get their marching orders, and I think they're trying to shift that, and I think the meeting that Trustee Spilsbury was speaking of was an attempt to recalibrate that a little bit. And hopefully it's a first step. It was still very much a one-way, I wouldn't even say dialogue, it was a one-way transmission.
Okay.
So perhaps a comment about, the Auditor General said you need to be thinking about this, you know, that there's, you're talking more to trust, not more than to staff, but I mean, it's not an equal balance right now. Most of the stuff goes straight to trustees, or to staff.
Trustee Smith?
Then, in that light, thank you. It would be best if all trustees got the knowledge that you gained. So maybe if the session could be recorded, so that they're gonna continue to do only board chairs, where only you are gonna gain that information that we don't get. And if the seminar or whatever is recorded, then the boards at least will be able to come in and take a look at it and have a conversation. But we all need that information.
Thank you. Any other business? A motion to adjourn, as there's no further business. Trustee DeGroote, Trustee Bowman. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Now we're moving on